the defending champion, the all-new Yamaha YZ450F.
What's up guys, Trevor Hunter here with Dirt Bike Test. Today we're talking about the 2023 Yamaha YZ450FX. This is Yamaha's off-road race bike in the Big Bore 450 class, and yeah, it's unchanged since 2021. And the only changes since then are some bold new graphics, and but yeah, this bike, even though it hasn't changed much, we really don't think it needs to change all that much. So today we're going to kind of go over how it is in stock trim and what makes this bike so special. So starting off with the power, the Yamaha does not lack in power in any way. For sure, one of, if not the fastest bike in this class. Whether you're drag racing through the desert, you're riding taller gears through the woods, you're kind of riding the motocross track, whatever, this bike has plenty of power on tap at all times. I don't think any of our riders have ever complained that the Yamaha wasn't fast enough. And so yeah, the Yamaha has that on its side, but despite it having all that power, it's a lot of usable, rideable power, which is very important. Some bikes can be horsepower kings, but once you get on the track and the dirt, they're really hard to ride, they're hard to manage, you can't hold on, they just get away from you, and it's really not all that exciting as it feels when you're riding through the parking lot. Whereas the Yamaha, which is so good at putting that power to the ground effectively and making it so rideable and usable. So starting off the bottom, plenty of bottom end and torque. It's actually one of the better bikes to kind of lug and ride taller gears. A lot of the other bikes are more motocross based in the FX kind of class, whereas the Yamaha is probably the most tuned for off-road with different ECU settings, different transmission, etc. So this bike can be lugged very well, and so if you're in an off-road setting like in the trees or the woods, or you're in the rocks or whatever, this bike really handles well and responds well to that kind of low bottom end power, using the torque, not so much the revs, to get the bike going and get through the section. Moving on from the bottom to the mid to the top, very smooth power overall, no big surges or drops or anything, just pretty smooth. It's definitely more of a bottom to mid bike, I would say. The top end isn't quite as impressive as like the KTM, maybe the Kawasaki, where they kind of prefer to be revved. This bike kind of responds well to kind of the lower RPMs in the bottom and mid-range. Moving on to the transmission, this is where this bike really separates itself from everyone else in the class. It's the only bike where it has a completely different transmission from its motocross brother. This bike has a 5-speed wide ratio transmission, so first gear super low, fifth gear super tall, and Yamaha actually did a really good job at spacing the gears out from first to second to third, fourth to fifth. First gear is honestly almost too low for just about anything we do here on the West Coast. It's just very low, revs out pretty quick, very jerky power too because it is so low. So quite frankly, I almost never use first gear unless I'm maybe riding through the parking lot or something. Usually second gear is still low enough with the stock gearing to kind of get me through the tighter technical sections without abusing the clutch too much. Occasionally I'll have to drop it into first, but more often than not I can rely on second, and that gets the job done with a little smoother power and just a little easier to manage in that tight stuff. But still, all the spacing from second to third to fourth, fourth to fifth, it's all really spot on. I don't think there's any change that I would really make to the transmission, especially with the stock gearing. It works really, really well. One change we do make to our bike that doesn't come stock is stock gearing is 1350, and we actually go to a 1452 gearing. And going up on both ends kind of helps smooth out that power just a little bit more. Because initially the power is a little more on the aggressive side, so smoothing out that power helps a little bit. And two, in doing that, it helps smooth out the chassis feel as well. So going to that 1452 gearing, go up on both ends, really helps with that power and that chassis feel, and it was a smoother overall ride. And what that also does is, on this bike, especially on motocross track and in like Western GP conditions, really I hardly ever go below third gear. Usually I roll corners in third gear, go to fourth, and go to fifth. Where you go to the 1452 gearing, you actually kind of just drop everything down one gear. So you hit corners in second instead of third, and then go up from there. And that gives you a little more on the top end, especially if you're in the faster conditions like we have out west. That really helps a lot. Just ride at the faster speed with at a lower RPM. Basically, it just gives you an extra gear. And if you don't need that, low gear, like you might need on the East Coast, I feel like it's pretty good change and simple change that we make to this bike. The mapping, this is the big deal on this bike. This is the only bike that comes with a free power tuning app that comes on your phone, the GY2R Power Tuner app. So what's nice about that is it's an endless combination of cams and exhaust and motor changes, and it can completely change this bike. I know during our shootout, a lot of our riders really weren't gelling with the bike all that much until we put a different map in, and all of a sudden it went from their kind of third, fourth place bike to the first place bike, all with the change of one map. Being able to change the mapping like that for free on the fly is a really big deal, and really just changes the power character and the overall handling of the bike as well. Kind of smooths it out, makes it a little more forgiving, easier to ride. Just overall, it agrees well with all of our riders. Clutch pull is good on this bike. This is the only bike actually that has a cable clutch of all the big manufacturers, and me personally, I like the cable clutch, especially this one. It's a pretty light pull for 450, very precise and kind of good feel for it. I know a lot of cable clutches out there can get vague or be really stiff to pull. Yamaha did a good job with this one. It's pretty light and has a really good feel for it. So moving on to the suspension, this is where this bike kind of lacks the most in some terrains. I'd say overall this bike is a little unbalanced. If you're on the East Coast and more GNCC style riding, that actually works quite well. But for us out west, the front fork springs are a little too soft for us. Causes the forks to ride low in the stroke, and the stiffer valving, which makes it actually feel harsher. And it kind of just holds the bike back a little bit. Like I said, if you're riding in the East Coast, you're riding small chop, rocks and roots, kind of slower speeds, it actually works pretty good. Keeps front end traction and just kind of plows through all that stuff. But as soon as you get into the bigger bumps, higher speeds, kind of the sand webs, big braking bumps, motocross track, you really feel kind of how unbalanced the bike is. The fork feels a little softer, rides low in the stroke, like I said. And you can kind of combat that a little bit with kind of a little lower sag in the back, kind of play with the clickers and the forks. But overall, just going to stiffer fork springs really makes a world difference in this bike. Anywhere from 0.48 to 5.2 fork springs actually really help with this bike. Because the fork valving actually isn't all that bad, but the soft springs kind of mask and kind of don't let the fork valving shine where it's good at. So like I said, going to that stiff fork springs really helps, but the fork valving is really good. Out back, the shock works really well too. Very soft, compliant, pretty plush feeling without being too wallowy or kind of too soft, too dangerously soft, like I say. It's pretty rideable and suitable for a lot of conditions and a lot of riders. The KYB components on this bike are really well built. You can make them really well. You don't need A-kit suspension, you don't need any of that. Just simple revalves, resprings, whatever. They go a long way in this bike. And one of the things the KYBs have over a lot of the other components is when you're bottoming, it's a very smooth transition to bottoming. Some of the other components you almost feel like a metal to metal clanking, and it's a really harsh landing. You kind of over jump or under jump something. Whereas the KYBs, you kind of, once you go to bottom, it's almost like a plush bottoming where you almost don't even feel that you are bottoming. A very smooth transition when you get that low in the stroke, and that's pretty nice when if you do get a little wild out there. Move on to the handling. This bike is a very smooth, stable chassis, probably the most stable chassis in its class. Overall, it's very smooth, good bump compliance, handles the bumps well. As the track gets rougher, this bike kind of shines more than some of the other bikes that tend to prefer the smoother tracks. But yeah, this Yamaha chassis, really good. It's a good mix of stability and precision and agility. It's not the best cornering bike by any means, but still very stable, and it corners well enough that if you are one that prefers a little more of a stable bike over a razor sharp cornering bike, this could be the chassis in the bike. And despite its heavy scale weight, I think it's one of, if not the heaviest bike in its class, at least of all the ones that we've tested. It actually feels like it's one of the lightest bikes in its class once you're riding it in the dirt. Kind of the overall chassis feel with the free revving, kind of snappy motor, kind of helps liven that up too. but Yamaha did a good job at kind of centralizing the mass, and got the backward cylinder, and just kind of the overall layout of the bike makes the bike feel much lighter than it looks on paper. So that's one of pretty interesting that a lot of our riders felt it was thought it was the lightest bike despite it being the heaviest on the scale. This bike isn't all that bulky anymore. A lot of riders used to complain that the Yamahas felt big and wide, but unless you're jumping from bike to bike, within 5 or 10 minutes you'll feel right at home on this bike, and you don't feel the extra width or anything. Kind of just feels normal, and some people actually like it. So I'd say that's really not an issue anymore. But one thing that is kind of an issue is the whole cockpit of this bike. A lot of our riders feel that the seat is too low and dished out, and the seat to peg distance is too small, so it feels cramped. And then the seat to the pegs, or seat to the handlebar ratio is a little off as well. So going to a tall seat really helps with a lot of this. Also going to that flatter seat profile makes it easier to move around on the bike. So that's one of our big mods that we do. You just put a tall seat. Taller riders also like the lowered pegs, so that's one option as well. And then the handlebars actually aren't all that bad. You can move around in the clamp positions as well to help a little more with that chassis feel, or the cockpit feel. Brakes are good these days. They didn't used to be the best, but Yamaha's come a long way, and the brakes actually work pretty good now. So they're average, which is actually, like I said, really good. Not the worst, but not the best. So to wrap it up, what makes this Yamaha good is it's so appealing to so many different riders, from fast pros to vet riders to intermediate riders. Everyone can seem to get on this bike, jump on it, and feel super comfortable almost instantly. It's so tunable with the mapping and the suspension and everything. It's all pretty good stock that this bike is tough to beat in stock trim. When you're going from the desert to the mountains to the motocross track to anything in between, this bike works and handles really well. Just about anyone can jump on it and feel comfortable with very minimal changes. What also makes this bike good is how good it is stock and how it doesn't need a lot of modifications. A lot of aftermarket parts really just detune this bike. I mean, triple clamps, engine mounts, exhausts, all this stuff is so good on this Yamaha that going to aftermarket stuff really doesn't improve this bike, and in some cases it can hurt the bike. So what's good about this bike is you can ride it so stock, and it's so good and so competitive. The motor needs zero work, it's plenty fast enough. Simple suspension revalve goes a long way, and just some of the personal touches like handlebars, seat, whatever, just a small change that most would do on any bike anyways. Once you do those, it really doesn't need much else, and I think that's pretty important. As well as this bike is very durable and well built. All the parts are well made, the wheels, the foot pegs, all the bolts, everything is just well made on this bike. So going to if you want to ride a stock bike and not have to make a lot of aftermarket changes, this bike really stands out in that way. It's really impressive at how good this bike is stock and how little modifications you need. So that's a wrap on the 2023 YZ450FX. If you want, check out dirtbiketest.com for more on this bike or any of our other 2023 testing. And until then, we'll see you out on the trail.
If you liked what you saw in this video, come check us out over at dirtbiketest.com on the webs. We have bike tests, product tests, a lot of fresh dirt, and you can even support us by clicking through our links. Hopefully, we'll see you out in the trail.